All right. Hosea chapter 2, we're working our way through verses 2 through 23, where God is fighting with his estranged family, but now we're turning the corner on verses 14 through 20. We'll see how far of that we get through today, where God talks about he's going to rebuild the relationship. We should end this chapter next week with getting all the way through verse 23, but I'm going to try and get us all the way through 20 today. We're doing good on time, so let's see what we can make of it. The second half is verses 14 through 23, where Yahweh is resolved to deal with the conflict between him and his family. And the second half breaks down into three portions, roughly, just like the first half did. Verses 14 and 15, God's going to seek his unfaithful wife again, and the way that this gets summarized, and I think it's the right way, is he's going to offer remarriage. Remember, this is not actually a fight that's happening here. This is a dramatization of the conflict between God as a husband and Israel as his wife. And the offer of reconciliation is going to really mean remarriage. And you're going to have to tie verses 14 and 15 with later verses to see this, but I'm introducing it here early on. Because verses 16 through 20 seems to be this picture of you're going to accept the proposal. You're going to accept the remarriage, and good consequences of restoration are going to happen because of this. And then finally, because the people of God actually accept God's restoration, it's going to bring a restored worldwide Edenic peace pictured in these last three verses of the chapter. Again, we'll probably get to these next week, but we're at least going to start in verse 14 and see how far we can get today. So let's read starting here, and we'll read down through verse 20. Therefore, I am now going to allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. There I will give her back her vineyards, and I will make the valley of Achor a door of hope. There she will respond as in the days of her youth, as in the days she came up out of Egypt. In that day, declares Yahweh, you will call me my husband. You will no longer call me my master. I will remove the names of the Baals from her lips. No longer will their names be invoked. And that day I will make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky and the creatures that move along the ground. Bow and sword and battle I will abolish from the land, so that all may lie down in safety. I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will acknowledge Yahweh. So, solving the estrangement between husband and wife here. God very suddenly shifts his tone from this judgment, exile motifs to restoration and relationship, welling up in the redemption of creation itself. I mean, he just turns it on a dime, and we're going to talk a little bit about the language here at the beginning. But as the relationship restarts in verses 14 through 15, once again in the wilderness, peace and security are established between the husband and wife, until finally the relationship between God and bride leads to all of creation being set right. Or to say it another way, when the husband and wife relationship is back where it should be, the surrounding world is reordered as it should be. And this is a good way to think about it, because all of the social conflict stemming from, in our culture, stems out of primarily two fundamental things. One, everybody's rebelling against God. That's kind of the big obvious. But two, nobody actually wants to play their God-given roles in society. And the battle of the sexes, in its modern format, has been going on since Adam and Eve first rebelled and blamed each other for what they themselves did. But this modern format of it is, if you want peace in society, you're going to actually have to reestablish male and female relationships again, according to God's proper order, which means you're going to have to stop rebelling against God and his God-given order. You can see all of this here, that if you pick up on it, creation does better when it goes according to God's plan, not ours. That is a very fundamental motif in the Old Testament. Here the picture is saying, Israel, you're not living a great life. You're in rebellion against God. And because of that, life's not going great for you. If you actually get led back into the wilderness, facing your punishment by your good husband, and let him restore you in the relationship, and then let him restore your life again according to his principles, things will go better for you. And that's just the broad strokes here playing out in the dynamic between Yahweh and Israel in this Old Testament passage. Punishment and restoration are themes that chapter 1 has already talked about, touched on, but we get a few variations of the themes from chapter 1 as the book begins to build. We get a return to the wilderness. This will be a key prophetic element. We talked about the second Exodus. The Exodus took place from Egypt into the wilderness. It says, I'm exiling you away from the land. Where are you going to go? Back into the wilderness. Whether the wilderness is literally the wilderness or it's just a picture of you're going to be back under pagan domination is irrelevant. The picture is you're going to be away from the land in harsher territory and place where it's harder to survive.
No milk and honey.
No milk and honey. And there, where all your blessings are going to be taken away, we can actually reenact the Exodus here. We can start rebuilding the relationship. There can be a remarriage between God and his people. And because of that remarriage comes new acts of creation. And this is very important to understand. It's all leading to new creation. One way or another, pretty much all the prophets that are looking forward to restoration touch on the notion of God recreating the earth, recreating creation itself. It's not just Isaiah 65 and 66 talking about new heaven and new earth that Revelation repeats. It's pretty much every prophet, but sometimes they're much more subtle than Isaiah trying to put a climactic end to his redemptive visionary picture. So let's go all the way back to where it all began. Verses 14 and 15. In here, Hosea, through the voice of the Lord, is portraying starting over with Israel by going back to where their relationship began, the Sinai wilderness. This is where God officially makes them a people, officially gives them his laws, his instructions on how to live, how to go about things. This is where they officially make their covenant agreement. This is where they get married, so to speak. So he says, we're going to go back there. I'm going to institute in the previous verses where he talks about I'm going to box you in, I'm going to hem you in and keep you from worshiping these other lovers. I'm going to orchestrate. That's the word I'm trying to think of. I'm going to orchestrate events so that it's like going back to the beginning for you people. The place where he met with her and provided for all of her needs. This is a key part of the understanding of the Exodus story. There he established their agreed upon relational covenant between them. And Israel agreed to this. Israel accepted the covenant. They had every chance and freedom to walk away, but they chose to make it. Then they chose never to live up to it. But starting over again, God is essentially looking forward to a day where they're not only going to accept the agreement, they're actually going to live up to it. There's much more to it now, but chapter 2 of Hosea becomes a great gateway into the prophets because all the prophets are going to touch on this on some level. And use the Exodus motifs and themes there for portraying what God is going to do in the future. The New Testament is going to pick up on this, and guess where it's going to start? In the book of Matthew, with Jesus being a second Moses, leading a second Exodus. Why does Matthew put these stories in of Herod killing baby boys? Because it's the Moses story. It's the opening of the Exodus. The second Exodus that Jesus leads begins the same way as the previous Exodus. Pagan kings trying to kill Jewish boys. And succeeding. It's Jesus is living out and summarizing in his individual life the story of Israel to create the next Exodus where even the Gentiles get in on the redemptive agreement between God and his people. So, little bit of surprising Hebrew here. Therefore, I'm now going to allure her. The Hebrew line that opens this phrase, hina lakam, I think is the second word, discourse markers that are the only time that they appear together is right here in Hosea, but they appear a lot apart. In verses 6 through 9, he's already used lakam, therefore, and here I think this is his first injection of hina. Hina is a very strong Hebraic phrase of saying, hey, pay attention, right? It gets your ears to listen up. So it's drawing the attention of the listener to something specific that he doesn't want you to miss. So it's always important if you see this look or behold, he's usually starting a new phrase in Hebrew, but he's also saying, now pay attention and don't drift off here. Listen to what I'm saying because this is very important. And so he opens it with actually two emphatic things to turn the corner in this fighting section. And the surprising thing is that in the midst of the fight, he turns his attention, he draws all this attention to himself, and then he actually stops fighting and actually tells the woman he's going to remarry her. This is surprising, okay? So it's just when the listener and the reader is gearing up for the husband to get the second win, to continue quarreling with his wife, that it's not going to happen. Instead, to the surprise of everybody, especially the wife, if she's paying attention to her husband's fighting, the husband actually draws all the attention to himself, says, look at me, woman, and then instead of actually continuing on railing in judgment against her, he suddenly has this tender, compassionate moment where he says, let's actually, hey, one day this is actually going to be resolved. One day this is actually going to be peace between you and I. The Hebrew is designed to draw this attention, make it a big moment, and then turn it into a nice, calm description of the husband redeeming his wayward wife. I call it a non-judgmental judgment speech because he's in the midst of judgment up here. And then he just turns on a dime from judgment to redemption here. So the two-word Hebrew introduction that the NIV just translates therefore, and the way that they always say it in preaching is you have to ask yourself, what's it there for? In Hebrew, it's actually there to grab the attention and pull the woman in, look at her face to face, and then kiss her on the forehead. That's the emotional dynamic shift happening in the passage that gets lost in translation. Everybody listening to this or reading it would expect one thing, but to the surprise of all, Hosea gives us another. So he's inverting the expectation. We can see God's true heart is not one for judgment because he doesn't just proclaim exile or proclaim judgment and then boot the woman out the door, which is what most men would do in their society if they've been treated this way by their wife. Instead, it's peace and long-suffering love that God says, I'm just going to suffer through this because I really, actually, the deepest thing that I want, my deepest motivation, is to restore this relationship between you and I. I don't want to outright destroy you. I only want to destroy you as much as you demand I do to fix the relationship. So this is putting the first 2 through 13 verses here into context. So you should be able to get God's heart here. The point of stripping her naked, the point of taking away everything so she can't plow or trade, the point of the exile itself is ultimately to fix the relationship. It's not so that God can just disgrace Israel for the sake of disgracing Israel. He's only disgracing Israel as much as Israel requires it to come to an acknowledgement that Yahweh is God and that she should be following him.
Sounds like an intervention.
It is. The exile is you could think of it very much as an intervention. God is finally done saying, I'm not just going to send prophets and call you to repentance anymore. I'm finally going to intervene and keep you from this. And you know what? This picture forms the eschatological picture for God doing it with the whole world and all nations. I'm finally going to have this planetary-wide intervention and stop the nations from their rebellion. It's not going to go well for them, but they asked for it.
Right.
The second half of this verse, I'm going to allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness. I will speak tenderly to her. Into the wilderness. The Hebrew word translated wilderness is the same word in verse 3 translated desert. Desert, wilderness, it's the same thing. The Sinai desert was just that. It was desert, but it was wilderness. Wild animals lived there more so than people. Dangerous wild animals that could hunt and kill you. So this dives into God's protection of Israel in the wilderness.
Is it also reminiscent of their first the reference that it's making to the wilderness?
To verse 3, into the desert. Read verse 3. What does verse 3 say?
Verse 3. Lest I strip her naked and make her as in the day she was born, and make her like the wilderness, and make her like the parched land, and kill her with thirst.
So the picture there for the desert, the wilderness, the parched land imagery is to say you'll be stripped of everything, you'll have nothing. And its connection here, and yes, there is a linguistic connection. There's a reason why he's repeating it here, is to say, when I lead you there, when I strip you of everything, that's when you're going to start getting it back the right way. So the picture there is first you have to lose everything. But that's not going to be the end of the story. And a lot of people that look at the God of the Old Testament with this suspicious air, oh, he's just a wrathful God of judgment, always fail to understand verses like this or acknowledge verses like this in the Old Testament. God is not just a God of justice and wrath for sin. He's also a God of loving kindness and tender compassion here. He's both and. I think we've talked enough about the fact that Israel is getting what they deserve according to the covenant stipulations. The eschatological judgment of all nations is nations getting what they deserve because they didn't want to acknowledge God and accept His mercy. So the place of judgment is the place where God's actually going to meet with His people and start to transform their broken relationship again. Not all suffering is redemptive. Not all suffering is meant to cause all this. Sometimes people just suffer because
It's consequential.
Yes,
Right.
that is very true. Now God can use all of it to redeem it, but He's being very deliberate here of saying your future is my fault. I'm deliberately going to cause your pain and suffering because you need that as a teacher. But it's not like in The Last Airbender where Zuko's dad, the Fire Lord, punches him in the face and burns his face. It says, you spoke out of turn, so suffering is going to be your teacher. Burns his face and kicks him out and says, now go find a guy who hasn't been found for 100 years and you can come home. Like, it's not cruelty. He's going to let the cruel nations unleash their cruelty. But God's saying, I'm not going to let them go any further than you determine necessary here. But when it's all stripped away, I will speak tenderly to you at that point. You can translate this, I may speak to her heart. It's very actually romantic language here. Very courtship language of the ancient world. It's not exactly seduction language, but it overlaps with that because this is the way hopefully married couples speak to each other, tenderly to the heart, and it actually leads to the relationship having its fullest expression. It's a pun. Wilderness and speaking have the same root consonants, and so he's tying up ends to what he's previously mentioned in verse 3. He's punning his way through this, very Shakespearean of him. So in the place where no life-giving provision exists, the wilderness, the desert, the place, in fact, where Israel almost faced destruction for breaking the covenant by the golden calf incident in Exodus 32 through 34, there in that place, in that type of situation, you don't have to think of this geographically, you have to think of this situationally. The place without all the provision, the place where you wouldn't expect life to happen, the place you wouldn't expect to meet a God. There, God is actually going to speak life-giving words into her exiled or lifeless existence. That's the point. Everything that the ancient world perceived as having life is going to be taken away from them. And there, when they have nothing, and Ezekiel tells it like this, Son of man, can these bones live? And Ezekiel's like, Lord, you know the answer to that. And he says, okay, speak to the bones and tell them to get up and live, because this is what Israel is saying. We're not a people anymore. There's no kingdom. We're in exile. We don't have anything. We're not a nation. We're not a people. And God says, I'm going to give you new life again as a people. It's the exact same thing as Ezekiel's famous Valley of Dry Bones passage. What is that? Ezekiel 37? I don't remember.
He writes a song.
What?
Then he writes a song about it.
Yeah, because easiest way to remember things, put it to music. So it's the same motif, and that's what I want you to see here. It's just an earlier version of it, because Ezekiel's still like 150, 175 years away from Hosea's time frame here. I will give her back her vineyards. Even while in exile, Israel will be given vineyards again. What does that mean? The fruit of the vine, taken away from her in verse 9, given to the animals to feast on in verse 12, will eventually return to the people. Even while they're in exile, which is an interesting way to portray this redemption. Because it doesn't say anything about giving the land back to them. It says giving the benefits of the land back to them. The motif of transformation from wilderness into abundance, from nothing into everything that you need. That's the picture here. And it reflects back on the actual Exodus and number stories where God always provided for his people despite their constant complaining and rebellion. Whether they're complaining in the book of Exodus or whether they're outright rebelling in the book of Numbers, either way, God's like, I would much rather you just go in and take the land now. I'm willing to fight on your behalf and give it to you. But if you're not going, you'll spend 40 years out here for your rebellion. One for every day the spies sought out the land, which is a summary way of an entire generation. Here, it doesn't give you a length of the time of the Exodus. It doesn't give you a length for how long the people are going to be in the wilderness. It gives you the promise of saying, there in the place where everything is stripped from you and you have nothing, God will begin to give you everything you need again. It's also tapping into Genesis 1, creation motifs. I mentioned this a little bit last week, where Genesis opens in verse 2. Now, in the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and void, empty and void. Tohu vabohu. It becomes the life-producing garden from a lifeless, non-existent, watery, chaotic nothingness where life can't exist or thrive. God takes it and turns it into a garden that produces life and sustenance for everything that all the animals and humans need. And it's tapping back into this idea. A vineyard is another motif for garden. And garden is a motif for creation and God's presence. So whenever you see garden or vineyard, this interrelated Hebrew language, it's picturing Eden, where God lived on earth and brought humanity into his home and said, live with me. I want to be down here with you. The tabernacle and the temple are Edenic pictures of God's presence. They're filled with flowers everywhere. The tabernacle is filled with cherubim and flowers are the two big things. And there's a big watery basin there because it's reenacting creation, going from the watery, chaotic nothingness that opens Genesis to the garden. And the garden is God's home. It's not man's home. Man is just allowed to live with God in his garden home on earth. And the temple and the tabernacle are recreations of this motif. The Exodus is saying, I'm going to strip it away until there's nothing but the watery, chaotic nothingness. And when you have nothing, I'm going to start building a garden again and giving you everything. It's the same basic pictures over and over and over again, no matter where you look. Whether you're looking in poetic narrative of creation in Genesis 1 and 2, whether you're looking at Hosea 2 and this undoing of creation through exile and a recreation motif narrative, and why it's going to well up here with an Edenic picture in verses 21, 22, and 23 that fills the whole earth.
So was the temple a substitute for what should have been the garden where we forever?
It's a substitute.
Okay.
I like the sound of that. It's a miniaturized version of the garden.
Because
and God,
we're in the garden scene.
We got ourselves exiled. That's the first exile.
Right.
Humanity is exiled from the garden.
Okay.
That's the first exile motif in the Bible.
Okay.
So Israel being brought into this land flowing of milk and honey is to say that Israel is going to be my new garden. This little strip of land, like 90 miles long and like 15 miles wide, is going to be the new Garden of Eden. And I'm going to plant you there. My presence is going to be there through the tabernacle and later the temple. You guys ruined it. I'm going to take it all away. And then Jesus is tapping into these motifs of saying, I'm the new temple. And my presence in my community is going to be the new temple. That's the place where my presence is going to dwell. with my people, not in a building, because that's actually more the Edenic idea. God lived in Eden, but he didn't have a home. He didn't have a house. He doesn't need one. And what Jesus is getting at in rebuilding God's presence on earth without a temple is actually closer to the Edenic than the substitute that is the tabernacle and temple. The substitute of saying God has to be here behind the curtain and you guys can only come so close. Even the priest can only come so close. And then if you're not a priest, you can't come any closer than that. And the Gentiles can't even come any closer than that. Degrees of separation. And the tearing of the veil, in part, is supposed to say no more Gentiles, no more Jews, one people, no more degrees of separation. You're either in or you're out, and you can come as far in as you would like.
So then the Holy Spirit shows up.
Yes.
And we become the temple.
Precisely.
Okay.
You're
I'm trying to follow the Easter egg.
You're a living embodiment of God's presence.
Right, because of the Holy Spirit.
Why? In Genesis 1, where he says, let us make man in our image, that word for image is idol. Let's make man our idol. You know why it's so grievous to God that Israel worships idols and that humanity still worships idols to this day? Because you're God's idol. The picture in Genesis of him forming man and breathing the breath of life in him, in the ancient world, they would have understood, oh, he's opening the mouth of the idol. The ritual that's done on stone, gold, silver, wood, to open the mouth and let the presence of the idol's being come in and fill the idol, that's the breath of life filling man in Genesis 2, in that chapter there. It's an idol opening ceremony. You're not supposed to worship creation because you're the creation that God has put his presence in so that he could be seen and known in the world. You flip the world upside down when God's idol wants to worship God's creation instead of God. That's the danger, and that's why he has to flip the situation upside down and say you have to have everything taken away from you because you haven't learned the lesson. I've been calling out to you with prophets for generations. You haven't listened to the message, so now I'm going to give you nothing. And when you have nothing, then you'll start listening to it. Okay? Raising kids. Have you ever had to take away your kids' stuff so that they learn the lesson? It's the same fundamental thing. So the motif here of taking it all away, sending them back into the wilderness, is a place of scarce resources. But a place of scarce resources is not an obstacle to God giving and blessing. It wasn't an obstacle for God's presence in verse 2 of Genesis 1 to say, it's formless, it's lifeless, it's void, life can't live here. I'll just create life anyways. But first, life. And step by step, he moves to creating an ordered universe. And the point of this is to tell Israel, even before they go into exile, the lesson that they're going to have to learn from this is that Yahweh, and not her lovers, can give everything that she needs, everything that she desires. And place and time, space and time are not an obstacle to that. I can strip you of everything that makes you a people here now. And I can give it to you even while you're off in the wilderness. Because their thinking was, if we don't have the land, who are we? If we're not a unified people in our own home, are we God's people? And God is saying, yeah, that's no big deal to me. You were my people in the wilderness before I brought you into this land. I'm going to kick you out of the land and make you my people again. Then I can give you the land back. It's retelling Israel's story again through exile. This line here, I will make the valley of Achor a door of hope. I don't know if this is the valley of Achor. This is just a valley that I found when I Googled valley of Achor. So it could be, I don't know. But the point of it is this. First off, theologically, the point is that Yahweh alone can make the valley of Achor a door of hope. Now, let's talk about what the valley of Achor is. Achor is the Hebrew word for trouble. Hosea is making a statement that in the time and place where Israel's sins lead to defeat by their enemies and being cast out of the land, they will actually find hope. Hey, it's actually going to pay off for you that Assyria is going to come and disperse you 10 tribes out of the land and send you everywhere. It's actually going to be the means of your redemption. It's referencing Israel's story in Joshua 7 where they had their first military setback. When they've gone in, they've had a few military victories, they go into the to conquer a little town. Ai was not very big, but this little town of Ai, and they suffer a horrible defeat. And the people are freaking out, and they say, well, what happened? Why has God left us? Ai was not that impressive militarily. How do we lose to these guys? And it turns out that a guy named Achan, whose name is related to Achor, I think it's the proper name form of Achor. I don't know that from myself specifically, but it turns out this guy, when they went in and they conquered a few places, God says, you are not to take any spoils of war here. Some places they could, other places they can't. But he's very clear, when you go into the town before Ai, they were not to take any of it. It was so corrupt that God says it's to be devoted to destruction, which is not necessarily a phrase saying kill everybody there. It's a phrase of saying you're not allowed to keep any of the spoils of war here. It all has to go towards the tabernacle or something, whatever it ends up being. Different places could be different things. But the point is, nobody's to be able to be rewarded for conquering these people. Achan stole some of the rewards for it, and so God defeated them at Ai. And they have to draw lots. They figure this out. Achan and his entire family are put to death. They're hauled out into a valley. They're down in the pit, and people are stoning them and dropping rocks on them to kill him and his entire family. And then after that, they go on fighting, and they start winning again, because he sinned so badly that the entire people needed to lose to learn a lesson. The valley of Achor being a door of hope is an allusion to this story to create this idea in the context of redemption. Disobedience leads to defeat, but handling the disobedience leads to later victory. At its most basic level, that's the story of Achan. That's the valley of Achor. God handling Israel's disobedience through exile will lead to her victory later in her history.
And that's the door of hope.
That's the door of hope. That's why the exile is called a door of hope here. That's why losing everything and being cast out of the land into wilderness, exile, is really the door of hope. Outside the land, you'll be able to reconnect with Yahweh again. And there, because of that reconnection, you'll find the hope in Him to be reborn as a people for future blessings to come. So the invitation is so gracious that Israel can't help but respond, which is the last part of the verse. She will respond as in the days of her youth, as in the day she came up out of Egypt. This phrase here is probably reflecting on Exodus 15, the Song of Miriam. It's right after they cross the Red Sea and the Egyptian armies are drowned, that they're finally free, and Miriam leads this great song of worship about the greatness of Yahweh and the weakness of all the other gods and His glory to overcome and set them free. It seems to be on some broad level reflecting that moment. Right when you were first saved, you were really happy about it. So before the grumbling, the complaining, the walking, the wilderness, their first response to God when they get out of slavery but into wilderness is to be happy about it. That's why I think this is probably reflecting on Exodus 15. I'm not the only one, lots of commentators do. So things will be like they were when Israel gave credit to Yahweh for their deliverance before they start grumbling against Him, and in many ways ultimately rebelling against Him later on. They'll say yes to God without being rebels and complainers about what it will take to be His people. And this is important because we really like God's redemption, but we don't like having to play our role in it, which is why the problems with the nominating committee, well, not the committee, the people not wanting to be on committees last year is on my mind as we head towards this. It's like people love to benefit and leech off the church. They love everything about it. And when it comes time for them to provide a service in restitution to what the church provides them week to week, nah. Even though the committee's like, you might have to meet like 3 times a year. It's not a big deal. A lot of it can be handled via emails. Nah, it's cool. It's cool.
You have your next sermon,
Yeah, right, yeah.
Very timely.
So, verses 14 and 15, here just to kind of summarize this introductory offer of marriage. It's God proposing marriage between Himself and Israel again, and verse 15b ends it with saying your response is going to be, yeah, I'll remarry you. I'll get back together with you. So just as the first Exodus, this wilderness motif is a honeymoon period between Yahweh and Israel, it's portrayed moving forward as basically everything's going to be good and there's no bad that comes up. But obviously, even after the exile, there's going to be bad here. So if you're thinking of it in terms of marriage, think of everything that follows here as being a honeymoon period. Other prophets will, of course, bring out the tension and the conflict between God and his people that will continue on, that continues on to this day. But here, the portrayal is, I'm going to take everything away, strip you down, there, offer you remarriage, you're going to accept, and everything's going to be golden. Yes, and that's why it works so good at the front of the 12 as a canonical portion of Scripture. Is it kind of here, the redemptive focus has been all bad, and when it turns to good, it's just all good. It doesn't weave them in together. It does all of it in chunks and gives the very black and white picture that's going to set up what later prophets will later on be a little more nuanced about. Things are not just going to be all happy-go-lucky all the time when God acts again. Any questions on these first two verses?
Asked and answered.
Cool. Let's continue on with connecting the pieces to the next group of phrases here. So verses 19 through 13 picture the blessing of creation, where the mother is attributing all of it to her lovers, the Baals. And the picture is they're going to be taken away from her. So verses 14 through 15 are reestablishing the relationship, and the mother abandoning all of her lovers. I should say wife, not mother there. So now moving forward in 16 through 23, the picture shifts to safety and prosperity because the relationship with God is devoid of interlopers. There's nobody coming in and hitting on the woman anymore. And the wife, even if they did, wouldn't respond to them because she's finally got the right attitude towards her husband. So it's really picturing future but ultimately eschatological intimacy. It's looking forward beyond the historical exile of Israel. We talked about that before. The second Exodus doesn't happen as soon as the 70 years of Judah's exile are over. They start looking forward to a new Exodus here. So Yahweh's really speaking of a time where he and his bride are intimate again, where she is finally transformed from her materialistic outlook to her value of God beyond the stuff that she gets out of God. That's what 16 through 20 is going to emphasize here. The Baals that she wants so badly to know, oh, this intimacy, oh, my lovers, oh, I have so many, the whoredom that she plays is going to be disregarded so that she can just know Yahweh alone the way it should be. And out of that relationship, the creation itself is going to be redeemed, healed, renewed, restored. So in that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband. You will no longer call me my master. Remarriage has been pursued. It's been accepted. It's portrayed as such in verses 14 through 15. So one way you can think of 16 and 17 is the benefits of true marriage being on display here. Now that she's accepted remarriage, her attitude is correct. She did not have any other lovers. She's able to actually have a real relationship with God. She addresses her husband as an intimate, personal way. My husband. It's a title that excludes other lovers. It's all about private intimacy. And I've said this before, but let me repeat it again here. Intimacy is fueled by exclusivity. The feminist movement lies when it says that you become more human when you just have more sex with more people. That is a lie. I always thought that, to give you an example, it was always very clever of J.K. Rowling to have this notion that murder rips the soul apart. And this idea of Voldemort creating Horcruxes and hiding portions of his soul inside of inanimate objects by tearing his soul apart through murder. When, in fact, that's a good portrayal of what murder does. But sexual promiscuity does it far more graphically, far more often than murder does. Sexual promiscuity, because every time you sleep with somebody, you're giving them a portion of your being. Which is why you can't have intimacy when you have 30 lovers. When you have a body count that's constantly going up. Today it's bragging rights for kids. Hey, by the time I turned 21, my body count was already over 21. I was like, great. You have such a broken capacity for intimacy. And you need God to strip that all away so he can begin healing you. Because sex is a glue that's designed, not just chemically, but emotionally, to stick people together. And if you've ever tried just gluing two pieces of paper together, glue a red sheet and a blue sheet together, two different colors, let it dry, let the relationship settle, and then tear it apart. Are those two pieces whole? No, they rip each other apart because it rips the soul apart to have to be with people that you're trying to connect yourself with over and over and over again. But every time you do, you leave a portion of yourself with them that you can't really get back. It tears the soul. You can't have intimacy because of that. The reason Israel can't have intimacy with their God is because they're not exclusive with God. That's why it's the first commandment. No other gods beside me. No other gods but me. Me alone as your God. That's the first rule for having intimacy with God. It's the first rule for having intimacy with your spouse. It's the reason why you can't have a lot of friends and they're all be on the same level. Jesus had his inner circle. He had the 12. And he didn't treat the 12 the same way he treated the crowds. He spent more time investing in the 12. He spent more time investing in Peter, James, and John. And there's no real clear answer as to why that is. My answer is, I think between Peter always sticking his foot in his mouth and the two sons of thunder always shooting their mouth off the few times we actually see them, I think they just needed the most work.
Right.
And so she's like, all right, guys, come on. No, you other 9 people, just hang out. You're doing fine. You're all at like a B level. Let's get the C crew in here and see if we can get them up to your level. I'm just spitballing here, but you get the idea that he draws the people in that are the most willing but need the most work into his inner circle. And that's a very different thing. Even Jesus cannot go around having the same level of relationships with everybody. He has to invest in certain people in certain places in certain ways. And if he treated everybody the same, he never would have had the 12, and the 12 would not have been ready for their ministry. And they would not have gone out and invested in other people that would carry on the work. So they're finally going to get this right. You will no longer call me my husband. You will call me you will no longer call me my master. You will call me my husband. Where she's been playing the whore with a lot of lovers, she showed nothing but obliviousness to Yahweh's presence. At best, I mentioned before, it actually looks like Hosea is saying she's deliberately ignoring God. Deliberately, like she knows enough about God to run back to him when none of her lovers are paying for her lifestyle anymore. So she's consciously aware, but she's been kind of ignoring God. Here, that's done away with. It's not going to be Yahweh amongst her many lovers. Her correct understanding is, I'm going to reject them all and I'm going to go for God. I'm going to go for God alone. Nobody but God. No God but God. Finally and fully. So she only pays attention to him in verse 5 where she can get her things, my things. But now the attitude is she's going to really and truly value the relationship above all material blessings, all material things. Something our materialist culture could understand. Something our mega church materialistic churches with fat budgets could really understand. Do away with the power systems that project you to 50 million people. Just do away with it and sit and worship the Lord and don't let people see what you're doing. So, well, we can't do that. How would people give online? How would they know we're meeting? How would they have an opportunity to give online? You are too materialistic. My Baal, my master. Whether it's my master here or my Baal here, it's the same phrase. It could simply mean my Lord and my master, as it's translated here in the NIV. That is a legitimate way of a wife referring to her husband in the ancient world. My master, my wife. It's not just a Japanese thing at the maid cafes or whatever, Welcome home, master. No, it was actually a term of respect. See, Hannah gets it.
You didn't get here.
Well, it's definitely in that direction.
Yes.
You took a trip to Japan.
There's a reason Stefan won't let me and Jared go to Japan. No, no, it has never come up. But would you want to? I'm throwing this out here right now. Just blink twice. You want to go to Japan? No. So it was a respectful way of it was not necessarily the way of saying, oh, he keeps me repressed. It's a way of showing respect. And here it's being used to so she shows more respect to the Baals. It's being tied to that idea than she does to me. She's nothing but disrespectful to me. So why doesn't he want the language of saying she will no longer call me my Baal, my master, my Lord? Because here the phrase Baal is being used with derision in Hebrew here. Yahweh doesn't want to be referred to by the title of the Phoenician storm lord. Get that God's name out your mouth, okay? That's the idea here. Do not call me by that storm god's name. I don't want any memory of him in this relationship. And the woman's like, yeah, I don't want that any memory of that God in this relationship as well. Let's do that. Let's kick him out. So in refusing to use the term, the wife is refusing to associate her good husband Yahweh with false gods anymore. It's showing her change of outlook. She's finally got it. Yahweh is not one amongst many. He's not even the most respected amongst many. He's the only one. And the intimacy that she has with him leads to different titles. The relationship is expressed differently. Not just calling the husband another lover. That language is done away with because her attitude is so drastically changed. But it's also working to correct two major distortions in Israel's present, Hosea's time, that will be solved when God reestablishes the relationship in days to come. So I'll end on these two things here for today. First, Yahweh is to be valued beyond that of a gift giver and a needs provider, which is the attitude of verse 5 that we've already mentioned. Hey, as long as my lovers can't provide, I'll just go back to my husband. My husband will give me my stuff. So she's changing her outlook from that previous perspective. This is the lesson she really needed to learn then, that she's finally learning here. Certainly, Yahweh is a provider for all the physical needs, all the life-sustaining resources, and he gives them freely and openly and graciously by his own goodness, more so than we ever need. But the point is that he's not to be sought, he's not to be feared, he's not to be worshipped, he's not to be exalted so that we can just gain provision, so that we can just transactionally get what we need from him. That's not a real intimate relationship. If you're thinking of God as like, okay, I say these Hail Marys, I say these things, and then God gives me what I want. Out of it, he gives me the grace that I need once I do transactionally this, that, or the other. It's not a real relationship, and it's certainly not an intimacy relationship. It's a transactional relationship. We'll talk more about that next week, I think, in some of the next verses. An example of this, anybody ever seen Richie Rich? It's an old movie. At one point, the kids come over, they play with Richie Rich because he doesn't have any friends. And it turns out the butler paid them all $50 to come play with Richie. And they obviously, the point of the story is he grows beyond that and he actually makes friends with them beyond the rich aspect of saying, hey, they can play tag by riding four-wheelers across the estate. If you're paying somebody to be your friend, they're not really your friend, right? If your God is paying you to worship him, you don't really know your God the way God is inviting us to know him. If you're here at church to just get your forgiveness so that you can go out and sin again, you don't really have a relationship with God. So this idea of you will no longer call me master is expressing that she no longer thinks of her relationship as transactional with God. She's not returning Yahweh's affection so she can get stuff. That's her present attitude, but it won't be her future. She wants Yahweh for genuine motivations of intimate connection for who he is as a person. Secondly, and we'll end here today, the intimacy between them flattens the hierarchical nature of the relationship that exists when they give allegiance to the Baals. Their attitude towards Baal is not only transactional, it's also the attitude that says, please don't kill us. Look, we'll serve you, we'll do what you want, and we'll acknowledge you, God, just please don't hurt us. Kind of an attitude. What is it going to take for you to be satisfied? And just let's put in that effort. Let's put in that work. The Baals or just Baal, as an example, was a tyrant towards humans. He used them to gain status. He used them to gain honor. He only gave them rain when he was pleased. And his pleased nature usually had to do with, am I being praised enough? Am I happy with the exaltation my people are giving me? And if he wasn't, then he would just randomly say, nope, worship harder. Otherwise, I'm going to withhold the rain from you. This is their outlook on Baal. And they're being cured of this outlook on Yahweh. Yahweh and Israel have now connected in this future portrayal on a much deeper level than the transactional nature of the relationship that they're currently using. Hey, we'll worship you in safety net in case Baal fails us. Yahweh, you can be our backup God. And Yahweh's like, I'm not going to take that. And here it's being replaced with a true connection. And this need for dominant I'm in charge, you just do what I say, that curve is flattened, where it's a much more equal nature of saying, okay, I've told you what I want. What would you like your husband to do for you? Ask of God like a father is being asked by his son for a good gift. Okay, this is how Jesus' parables expand this idea out to include the Holy Spirit in the book of Luke in particular. It's about saying, look, are humans and God ever equal? No. Obvious answer, right? But relationally, you can actually function in a way where your respect and honor towards God and your intimacy actually says, look, I'm not here to make demands. I'm not here to use you. I love you. I respect you. I have this relationship with you. But I also have this request. And it's treated as a request. And the portrayal of the husband and wife is to say, look, when the wife actually respects her husband in such a way, she doesn't come making demands of him. In the ancient household, depending on where she was in the ancient world, she may not have any legal rights. This was not supposed to be the case in Israel. But the way it's supposed to work is, okay, if you have a real relationship with your husband, despite the fact that he's head of the household, and he has an authority that is not fully reciprocated with you, why don't you just try making an honest request of your husband? And if you have a genuine relationship with your husband, wouldn't he want to give you your request simply because you're the one making it? Other women can come and request the same thing or make the same demands. He's not going to give it to them. But you have a relationship here. Try asking from a genuine place of relationship and equality. And if your husband is just looking down on you and he says, nay, woman, then that won't happen. But when he looks at you and he says, yeah, I may not be under any social obligation because you are my wife, I would love to do that for you. That's a much more equal function in the relationship without doing away with hierarchy. That's the New Testament picture of this as well. And the picture is, yes, Yahweh is always going to be Lord above Israel. Jesus is always going to be the king, but he's actually willing to operate on such a level where when you get to know him, just ask. Don't come to him and say, okay, God, this is what I want. Don't come to him and saying, I expect this, that, and the other. Just say, Lord, my honest request is this. And if it's good, I ask you to give it to me. And that's the attitude that Jesus says, if you do it like that, you get whatever you want. It's a hyperbolic statement, but it's also not that far away from the true reality for it. Because when you do that, you don't ask for things you don't need. You don't make demands of it. And that's the relationship that we're actually invited to with the Lord. Attitude is everything. Write that on down, put that on a t-shirt, and put it in your prayer notebooks, and when you come to the Lord and you pray, make sure that your attitude is one where you and God are not equals, but he's willing to relate to you anyways. So maybe take the proper outlook and respect God for that attitude, and he's much more willing to actually converse and have a relationship with you